Hello and welcome to Trigonometry. I'm Francis Foster.
I'm Konstantin Kishin.
And this is a show for you if you want honest conversations with fascinating people.
Our brilliant guest today is a police whistleblower who resigned in protest of the grooming gang scandal and the author of this book, Survivors. Maggie Oliver, welcome to Trigonometry.
Delighted to be here.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a while since we've been trying to get you on. A lot of people who watched our interviews with Dr. Ella Hill, watched our interviews with Samantha Smith, they've been saying to us for a long time, we should get you on. You're here now. Thanks for coming. Tell everybody, who are you? How are you where you are? What's been your journey through life?
Well, I've had a long journey because, I'm a bit of an old bugger now. But that means that I've lived a lot of chapters of my life. And I think I always say that I'm just an ordinary woman. I've got 4 kids. I was married to the love of my life, who unfortunately died in his 40s from bowel cancer. I went back to university at 37 because I wanted to be a teacher, actually. And then I thought, well, if I don't get into teaching, what can I do? I thought, I know, I'll join the police.
Same thing, really, yeah. Maggie. I got to see them a little earlier.
The police is a lot less dangerous nowadays, mate.
Yeah, so I kind of fell into it. I got in I was 41, and I went in originally to do child protection, but very quickly realised that I would have World War III every day. When I was told by another social worker that they were working with a family, I couldn't go home and forget about it. So I reset my direction and I went into serious crime. So I became a detective. I worked in the major incident team. I did witness protection, gang-related murders. And then I was kind of headhunted for the first grooming gang job that I was taken onto. In 2004, but I'd had a very full life before I joined the police, so very varied background really, but always driven by a sense of right and wrong, really simple principles really. And I believe that when I joined the job, I really was going to do what I promised to do, which was uphold the law, protect the vulnerable, uphold fundamental human rights. And I look back now and I think, God, how naive was I? But I'm not naive anymore.
No, I don't imagine you are.
No, I'm not.
So let's talk about that journey from being quite naive to where you are now. So you are headhunted to investigate a grooming gang.
Yeah.
How do you get from that to sitting here where you've resigned from the police, having attempted to bring light to the issue, being fobbed off, ignored, etc.? Tell us about all that.
Well, that job that I was first recruited for was called Operation Augusta, and it was 2004. And a little girl who was 15 called Victoria Agolia had died, actually in Rochdale. She'd been horrendously groomed and sexually abused. She was living in care, and one of her abusers had given her an overdose of drugs, which led to her death. Alongside that, at exactly the same time, a documentary team were making a documentary in Keighley in South Yorkshire, and that documentary was called Edge of the City. And they had uncovered a problem in Keighley where young, vulnerable, working class white girls were being groomed, sexually abused and exploited by gangs of predominantly Pakistani men. And the powers that be within the police, I now know, feared that when that documentary went out, there would be a public outcry. And at the same time, Victoria had died in Manchester. So with hindsight, I know that GMP, Greater Manchester Police, put together a small team of officers to kind of derail the criticism that we were doing nothing about that case. But the programme went out and there wasn't the public outcry that was expected. And so Greater Manchester Police, in their wisdom, deliberately and intentionally shut down that job. The official reasoning is now, from the independent review in 2020, that the Chief Constable, the Assistant Chief Constables, Head of Crime in GMP made the conscious and deliberate decision that they would close down that job because they would not put resources into it. Now, when they closed it down, Constantine, we had over 100 paedophiles on a database that we knew were abusing children. We had about 36 children, most of whom were living in care, who were being raped on a daily basis. That happened at exactly the time that my husband died of terminal bowel cancer. I went off work for a couple of months to nurse him in his last weeks. When I came back to work, that job had died a death.
So, Maggie, sorry to interrupt.
And it's complicated, I know.
I know. It's not that it's complicated. It's hard to believe, frankly. What you're saying is the police, the senior police officers created an investigation in order to deflect attention from failings.
Yes.
And then when the failings went public and didn't generate a backlash, they shut down the investigation that they created to cover up for that.
They closed it in its tracks.
Even though you knew about hundreds of pedophiles who were abusing children on that.
They abandoned all those young children to their abuse. And furthermore, they allowed those 100 pedophiles and more to continue to abuse for another 15 years. And it's really only because I began to, when I resigned, which is further down the road, that I never forgot those children. And pretty much every interview I do, I refer to Victoria and I refer to those children, because that is not why I joined the police. You know, the police are there to prosecute paedophiles. You don't just suddenly decide that these kids don't matter. You don't do it. In my book, that's not why I joined the police. But I couldn't get any answers. I was told there was no evidence. Well, I know that was wrong because I was on that job. I knew who those kids were. And it's just wrong. But I was pretty powerless to do anything. You know, I just lost my husband. I've got 4 children. I was a single parent, and I didn't have a single piece of paper to prove what I was saying. And in fact, none of those rapes at that point had been recorded. So on paper, it didn't exist, but it did exist. And now, 20 years later, Andy Burnham in Manchester heard me like rabbiting on the radio, and he put together an independent review. And the review team spent 3 years looking at that job, and the official findings were, yes, there was a job. Yes, there were 100 paedophiles. Yes, there were 36 children. And GMP have now been forced to reopen that case 20 years too late, because those men, you think how many other children those men have prosecuted. So when I say I am not naive, I am not naive because they deliberately did that. So I don't trust them. There is a bigger agenda here, and those kids don't matter. And I always say, if those children had belonged to the Chief Constable or Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak, they would have prosecuted those men with every breath in their body. But those kids don't have anybody fighting their corner. You know, often they come from troubled backgrounds or they live in care. And you know what? It is just unforgivable. And, you know, I'm 20 years on from it. And I have been through a lot of shit in those 20 years. And I have thought I would go to prison for speaking the truth, because that's what GMP said to me when I said I was going public. But the truth is the truth. And police officers, this is not about individual police officers, because every organisation has good and bad. I was a good police officer and I did my absolute best. The people who are the bad ones are those at the top who made the decision to close that job down. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about the officers on that job. So when, like today, we have them saying, oh, we're going to, you know, deal with police officers like Carrick and
Wayne Couzens.
And Wayne Couzens and that. Yeah, they're bad apples, but there's a lot of good apples in that box. And for me, the book stops at the top. So when the Chief Constable and Assistant Chief Constables make a deliberate decision to close a job down like that, they should be in prison, I'm afraid. They are guilty of misconduct in a public office. And, you know, I started my charity, the Maggie Oliver Foundation. That isn't funded by the government or by public bodies. It's ordinary, decent human beings who believe, like I do, that children like that deserve to have a voice, that they deserve to be protected, that the police are there to prosecute the offenders. They are the bad guys, not the kids. So I'm sorry to go on, but it still bothers me today that that can happen, and still is happening, because there are grooming gangs operating today. This is not a historical problem. And in the charity, we are supporting and fighting for victims today who are still being silenced, who are still having the door slammed in the face. We've currently got cases in Hull, in Barrow, in Oldham, in Rochdale, in South Wales. So, you know, this is not historical, and the police will have you believe it is historical, that now things are a lot better. I think things are better in that there is now awareness, but the authorities are still failing massively. The police now are basically not fit for purpose. You know, they're under-resourced, they're not trained effectively, they're a political animal in many respects. So there's still a lot of work to do.
What does that mean, Maggie? They're a political animal?
Then I don't think they're independent anymore. You know, there is no accountability. When I'm talking about I was talking about 2005, but I know, for instance, that, and this is not I'm not a party political person in any way. So, you know, my distaste, my distrust of the establishment goes to all political parties, because I know in 2008, for instance, that the government at the time were Labour, and I know that the Home Office sent out a circular to all police forces saying that they should not investigate these kinds of crimes because they feared a backlash, that they didn't want to stir up Islamophobia. Another thing that I will say, which I didn't know at the time, on Augusta, the very last entry on our database for that job was on the night of the 6th of July 2005. Now, my husband died on the 5th. On the morning of the 7th, we had the London bombings.
Reports are just coming in of an explosion at Liverpool Street Station here in London.
I'm at Aldgate. I can confirm a bomb damage to train, one carriage completely wiped out, at least 9 people very seriously injured and trapped, 2 confirmed fatalities.
We're now also hearing that there have been further incidents at Russell Square.
And literally, there was just a very loud bang. The train derailed. There was smoke everywhere.
There are 2 trains stuck in tunnels at Edgware Road, and it's not known if they've collided or whether passengers remain on board.
Everyone thought they were going to die. People started saying prayers, praying to God, panicking, breaking the carriage windows with their bare hands, anything to get oxygen into the carriage.
We're now hearing reports that a bus has been ripped apart in an explosion in central London.
One man has actually shown myself some footage that he recorded on his mobile phone of a bus exploding a few streets away, just near to Euston Station, people lying on the floor.
There was not another entry went on that database after that day. Now, you know, go figure. We had a full major investigation team working on that job on the night of the 6th of July. On the morning of the 7th, we had all the London bombings. We had a fear of Islamophobia. They closed down Operation Augusta. I don't believe that was a coincidence. But the losers in all this are the children. And sometimes the truth hurts. But, you know, that is the truth. And until somebody tells me differently, that is what I will believe. But I have to caveat that, really, by saying that I know that there have been racial elements to this particular kind of sexual abuse. And I don't think you can ignore that the vast majority of these victims in these cases are young, white, working class children. And the vast majority of the offenders are Pakistani Muslim men. That is a fact. And the statistics won't show that, but that's because the statistics were never gathered by the authorities because they didn't want those statistics. But what I always say is that for me, this is about child protection. And I don't care if it's Jeffrey Epstein or a priest in the Catholic Church or Harvey Weinstein or your uncle or your next door neighbour. For me, raping a child is against the law. And in this country, the law is there to prosecute the bad guys. And there is nobody worse in my book than a child abuser, because every child deserves to have a life. And when they don't have a family or somebody like me protecting them, then that is the duty of the state to step in. Social services, the police, to make sure they're protected. And what I saw was the absolute opposite of that. And it goes against every single thing that I believe in. So in the end, I had no choice other than to say what I believed to be the truth. And that wasn't in 2005. That was in 2012, really, when I resigned. Because after Augusta, when it closed down, I went back to my normal day job, which was in major crime. Went back to gang jobs and, murders and shootings. And I was also a family liaison officer. And then for my sins, in 2010, I was approached and asked to join another job in Rochdale, which became known as Operation Span. And at first I said, thank you, but no thanks. You can stick your job. I ain't interested. I've been there. I've got the T-shirt. And I am not going down that road again. But I was given cast iron guarantees. I was given policy documents and paperwork to say there would not be a repeat of Operation Augusta. So I went on that job, and lo and behold, I saw a repeat.
So what happened with Operation Span?
I was asked to join OpSpan, and the abuse had long finished on that job. This was 2010. The abuse had finished in 2008, but nothing had happened. And Greater Manchester Police decided that, what happened really was there was a routine property review within GMP. And in that property review, an officer discovered actually a fetus in the police property system. And that fetus had just sat there for 2 years. It opened up a can of worms, and it turned out that the fetus had been seized from a young girl who became known as Ruby in the drama Three Girls that I worked on.
There's no such thing as a child prostitute. What there is a child who's been abused.
The 9 men have been released on bail.
How many victims?
47. And when they went to the police, nothing was done about it.
No one bothered. What do you think that does to a kid? We treat them as human beings and we say we're sorry.
What is the point if a jury is not going to believe she's telling the truth? I watched her interviews and I believed her.
Ruby had been groomed, sexually abused as a 12-year-old, then a 13-year-old. She was made pregnant when she was just 13 by one of the gang of abusers. Police seized that fetus without her knowledge, without her consent, without her mum knowing, and it had been put into a police property system where it had sat for 2 years. Nothing had been done with it. So when the property review was done, that fetus was found, and they decided that they had to do something about this. So I was brought in onto that job. We had dozens of men that we knew were abusing children in and around Rochdale, also in Oldham. I was asked to bring that young girl on board as a victim. By this time she was 14, I think. I was asked to also bring on board her sister, who had also been horrendously groomed and sexually abused by dozens of men. But 2 years before, she had been arrested on suspicion of being a madam at the age of 15. People will have to read my book to really understand the complexities. I'm just trying to simplify it.
Yeah.
But I was told at that point that she should never have been arrested, which she absolutely should not have. That I was being asked to bring those 2 children and their family and other children potentially on board to tell us what had happened. and to prosecute this gang of paedophiles. So I told him I'm not interested, because the damage to me from Augusta has never left me, really. In fact, I was talking to one of those girls 2 days ago from Augusta, so I'm still in touch with some of them. But I was told that the most senior lawyer in the CPS had scrutinised the evidence from 2008, and the young girl, Amber, in the drama, never should have been arrested. She was officially categorised as a victim, and I was given the green light to go ahead and go and interview those two children. I spent 8 months interviewing those children, and they named and identified multiple men. Ruby gave her consent, as did her mum, for us to use the DNA that proved who had got her pregnant. Now, she was a child who had been 12, maybe even 11, but 12 to my knowledge when the abuse began. She had a statement of special educational needs. She was in a special school. She was being picked up at the school gates by her abusers. We had a fetus. We had DNA that proved who had got her pregnant. He was a 40-year-old man married with 3 children of his own. Can you believe that even that man was never charged with rape?
Why not?
Because they took the easy option and decided to charge him with sexual activity with a child. He was out of prison in less than 3 years, and she was not even made aware or consulted about his release. He was allowed to go back to Rochdale, where he still lives, to walk around where he bumped into her in the local Asda, walking around the end of an aisle. She went into a total meltdown, ran out of the shop and rang me in, floods of panic, saying he was called Billy. That was his street name. His real name is Adil Khan, and I'm not, his name is in the public arena because he was prosecuted and convicted, but he was out of prison in less time than you get for, parking on double yellow lines sometimes. So I was fucking fuming.
Sorry, I know. No.
I'm trying to pick the big things out.
You're doing a great job. Yeah. I just want to. There'll be people watching this going, "What the hell is she talking about?" How is it possible that in modern Britain, with all of that evidence that you're talking about, DNA, fetus, statements, etc., somebody who's just there to be prosecuted? I understand sometimes these cases are complicated and you can't get the right information and all of that. But in this case, it doesn't seem to have been the case. Why? You say they took the easy option. Why? Why did they take the easy option?
Because if she had been 12, there is absolutely no defence. It's statutory rape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she was just 13, because the fetus and the number of weeks pregnant she was, we knew exactly when she'd got pregnant. Because she was just 13, that would have meant that they would have had to prove that she did not consent to her rape. In my book, a 13-year-old child with special needs cannot consent.
In most people's books,
yes.
But the CPS will say, well, it's a lot easier to prove. They don't have to prove anything then, because there's a fetus, she was pregnant, we knew who he was. So he had had sexual activity with that child. They didn't want to go to a trial where they would have to prove that she could not consent. So they took the easy option.
Is that a money thing, Maggie? Is it a money
thing?
thing?
It's a resources and a money thing.
Yeah.
And it's lazy.
Yeah.
It's lazy, and it's not right.
No.
It's not right. And if that was my daughter, I would want that man prosecuting for rape, because she was not able to give consent. She was drunk every time she had sex. We had a fetus, as I keep saying. Yeah. So for me, that decision was made for resources and because they couldn't be asked, basically. But that doesn't make it right. It's wrong. In relation to the other young girl, the other child, who I had been given promises that if I brought her on board, that I would be allowed to hold her hand, both their hands, right through to trial. 8 months down the road, again, like Augusta, they made the powers that be, so chief constables, gold commanders, people in CPS sat down and they made a policy decision that they were going to build a case around one child. And whilst I accept that, because I know that we can't always bring everybody into one trial, it becomes too complex, I do not accept that we cherry pick which rapists we prosecute and which children we support as victims. If they have given us evidence and they have spent months identifying their abusers, and the top lawyer in the CPS has identified them as a victim, I'm sorry, you don't change your mind 8 months down the road. And that's exactly what GMP did again. They changed their mind. And it was, if anybody wants to watch the drama, Three Girls, it is a drama. It does not go nearly far enough. The police and the CPS get off very lightly. Again, I'd say read my book. But what happened about 8 or 9 months down the road, after these kids had unburdened their souls to me, I spent every day with them, really. They couldn't have done more to help the police. And 8 months down the road, Friday afternoon, I just get, my boss comes up to me and says, "Oh, Maggie, can I have a word?" Yeah, of course you can. This girl had just identified 10 of her abusers in an ID parade. She'd fell apart, but she'd done it because she didn't want the same thing to happen to other children. My boss said to me, "Just want you to know, we've made a decision. We're no longer going to use Amber. But don't get upset. We are going to use Ruby." And I just felt, I just couldn't, you know what? I felt like murdering somebody. And I just picked my bag up and I said, and this scene in the drama is actually pretty true. I just said, "Well, you know what? I am not going to use anybody. It is not right." And I was out of there. And I couldn't believe that I was seeing a repeat again of what I'd seen previously.